Good morning. Good morning.
So let's not worry about the technology. I was a school teacher. It's just, you all know, we always have another plan. So let's not worry about that because it's really about the conversation in the room and not the technology. So I'm Steve Becton. For those I haven't met, it's a pleasure to meet you. And if I go too fast, just do this but I talk slow. I'm from the South. Don't worry about it. So, as a matter of getting to know people, our accents are important. So I'll tell you what you're hearing. If you've never been to Memphis, Tennessee, I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. Now, what you're not really hearing is a country accent. You get country a little lower in the South, where Louisiana, where they talk like that. So what you're hearing here is I grew up in an all-black inner city community in Memphis, and then I went to a predominantly white college, and then came to working for Facing History. You put all that together, and this is the accent you get. So it's more of that. But it's a pleasure to meet everybody. I'm going to be not doing a lecture, but it's leading a conversation. We're going to be talking to each other about this topic of teaching difficult histories. And then I'm going to sort of point to a bit of a case study. I had the privilege of teaching Holocaust to a classroom of mostly all African American students in a community in Memphis, Tennessee. And I learned some fascinating things in that class. You know, I learned more from them than they learned from me for sure. And experiencing a group of all black kids in Memphis, Tennessee navigate the Holocaust and make meaning of it for their own lives was pretty fascinating for me. Frankly, I was told, by even some people in education and some people in the community, why are you teaching the Holocaust in that school? Those kids need to be learning their own history. And I understood that take, because often people from marginalized communities actually do not get their own history, not in a meaningful way. And so I understood that sentiment. But I want to tell you what happened. I'll let you, hopefully we get the technology, I'll let the kids tell you what they got out of learning the Holocaust. So at any rate, so we're going to just explore this conversation of difficult histories. And again, we're going to talk to each other because the knowledge is in the room. It's not just in the front of the room. So we're going to co-construct this understanding together. So I want to start quickly with sort of what brought me to the work. I work for Facing History in Ourselves. I've been working there for nearly 20 years now. And I was happily teaching my class in a high school class in Memphis, Tennessee. I thought I'd teach 20 years. I was about into my 5th year teaching. And then I go to this Holocaust and Human Behavior workshop in the summer. I just wanted to learn about the Holocaust. Had no intentions of becoming a Facing History teacher. I didn't even know what it meant to be a Facing History teacher. I was an economics teacher, as a matter of fact. And then I just all I knew about the Holocaust was, that thin narrative of, Hitler came into power and committed genocide. That's all I knew. And I was by then I was on my way to a master's degree, but that's all I knew about the Holocaust. And so I wanted to know more, and I came to this workshop. And it absolutely was transformative for me, both professionally and personally. One of the things it taught me that I really wasn't a good teacher at that point. Because I thought I was a good teacher until I went to this workshop. And I saw how to make learning come to life, right? How to make learning relevant and how to get people to connect to the learning. Say, oh, that's what teaching is really about. It's not about giving out this information and hoping that students can give it back on the test. That's what I was doing. And I thought I was good until I saw what good teaching looks like. So it transformed my classroom, but also my own life. About midway through the seminar, I'm listening to Nina Katz. I get a little emotional talking about Nina. Was a Holocaust survivor, and she, this is my first time hearing a survivor, and Nina is talking about, surviving. And then what she did when she came to Memphis is she went into, education was important to her, and she went into my communities that I came from, and among a lot of things she did, she started reading and literacy programs. I'm sitting there thinking, after surviving the Holocaust, and she survived one of the most brutal camps. And the only reason she survived, just a quick side story, is that she was tall. You all study the Holocaust, know that like the reason people survive sometimes it's really small reasons or almost lucky reasons or happenstance. It just doesn't make sense, right? She was tall and she can reach certain things, and even for a young girl, because she was tall, she was deemed valuable. So this was part of the why she survived. But at any rate, Nina was telling her story, and for the first time in my life, I was connected to somebody else's experience that wasn't my own in a meaningful way. And then if that wasn't enough, then the next day, here comes this session called The Christian Roots of Anti-Semitism. Now, very Christian. I walked out of this session because I never heard the Christian roots of anti-Semitism. I was like, no way. My tradition is not anti-Semitic, especially the black church. I mean, we didn't talk about, we didn't talk about anti-Semitism in the black church. So I actually walked out of that session. I almost couldn't take it because it was too much for me. And I came back and sort of sat with it, and that becomes another transformation. And so I knew then, I didn't know I would end up teaching this, but I knew then there was something about this history, and it was something about students even that were not directly connected to this history. There was something about walking through and learning this history. I knew it then because of what I experienced, and then I got the opportunity to come to work professing history. So that's my story. That's how I got here. And so I would love for you to do, just for a quick couple of minutes, as a way of opening dialogue. So since you're not up here, you won't get as much time as I just got to tell your story. But for a couple of minutes, just turn to somebody and say, how did you get here? In a sense, like, how did you get to do whatever work you do, teaching, if you're in the community, whatever you do, what brought you to the work, this memory work? Why are you interested in this? What brought you to it? Just take a couple of minutes and turn to somebody and share a little bit about what brought you to this work.
Vielleicht mit jemandem, den du nicht so gut kennst.
Okay, take one more moment, one more minute. Okay, who's ever talking, let them finish their last sentence there. You'll have some more time to share. Okay. So, no worries if you didn't get finished. It's a ... It's not a period. So you'll have some other time to share. So the conversation is about navigating difficult topics, right, in history. And these are some of the case studies that we navigate at Facing History in ourselves. I won't name them all, but they are centered on moments in both U.S. and world history where, communities where democracy was fragile, where communities were going through, even tragic events, or dealing with the legacies of tragic events, even dealing with genocide, racism, anti-Semitism, where we were grappling with the fragility of democracy, grappling with the danger of indifference, right? Grappling with this idea of human choices and human behavior. What you learn in the memory work, of course, is that history is a collection of choices that people are making, right? And that choices matter. This is what really makes history. It's the choices that people are making. Everything that happened, even in the Holocaust, is a series of choices that people were making, right? Human suffering in extreme inhumanity. And then there's these moral and ethical dilemmas, and how do you navigate those with students? So all of this happens in this context of teaching difficult covering. There are other bullets that you can probably think of. These are just the ones I named. So if we're gonna teach these themes, we must, one, value conversation, value dialogue, value conversation, to find value in actually having the dialogue. So I want us to, this is I think it's a quote you might be familiar with. Will somebody read this out loud? Anybody in the room, in English or German, whatever, it doesn't, just somebody would read it out loud for us. Just put the words in the room, yes.
The philosopher Hannah Arendt said that the essence of being human is participating in moral discourse with others. The things of the world become human for us only when we can discuss them with our fellows. We humanize what is going on in the world and in ourselves only by speaking of it. And in the course of speaking of it, we learn to be human.
Yeah. So let's think about this together. So anybody, what thoughts or words just kind of resonate with you from this quote or jump off the page for you? Yes.
Humanize.
Humanize. Yeah. Yeah. So conversation is humanizing. What might make it humanizing? You want to say more, Derek?
It feels to me like she's saying that connecting with another person is how something as abstract as the world and events outside of us becomes part of us.
Yeah, yeah. By the time I had heard Nina Katz, it was like the fourth day of the seminar, and I hadn't gotten it yet. I mean, 11 million victims, 6 million Jews. I mean, these numbers where I was like taken back by them, but I really didn't get it till I heard one person, till I heard Nina. And then we were in conversation about Nina's experience, this one person experience. And from then on, I mean, you never understand the Holocaust. From then on, though, I had a sense of connection to it because of Nina and hearing her story. Anybody else, a word, idea that jumps off this page for you? And there was someone else? Anybody?
Speaking,
Speaking. Say more.
that it takes, speaking needs a listener.
Mm.
It's an active thing, and to listen is an active thing. So if you get together, you do
Yeah.
act.
Yes.
You don't only stand by.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people say, think about their activism and if they're doing enough. Being here right now is activism. It's not the only form of activism, but talking, being in conversation, speaking, learning, connecting with people in itself is activism. And it's part of our activism to know something, you know, to hear other people. And then our activism become more informed because of these experiences. So we want to think about that, but conversations can be difficult. Even with that amazing quote, conversations can be different. what makes a conversation not difficult? And so we won't, in the interest of time, we'll stay in the big group to make up a little of the time. But what makes a conversation difficult? Let's just talk about that. Let's popcorn that idea a little bit. By popcorn, I mean just different people just speak. What makes a conversation difficult?
When participants have different ideas about a word and expressions.
Yes, when there's different ideas about a word and expression. Even different experiences with the word. I've done workshops where we ask people just quickly write your definition of race. And we get 30 different definitions. And we're trying to talk about race. And when I say race, or you say race, are we even thinking the same thing? So, right, there's difference in ideas. Somebody, I saw another hand. Language, yeah. Language is, it makes conversation different. Even among us who speak the same language, right? Yes. Yes, sir.
Ich muss speak German. Der unterschiedliche Bildungsstand.
Different levels of education can make it.
Yeah. Different levels of education, different levels of experience with the topic. Yes.
If you have different social or cultural backgrounds.
Yeah. Your backgrounds really comes into these spaces. Yes.
If one or both people feel shame or defensive around what you're talking about.
Yeah. If there's defensiveness, shame, generational. Yes.
Yeah, the art of listening is not easy.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't know how to listen.
Yes, the art of listening is not easy. No, people know how to listen. You know, sometimes when you're listening, when you're in a conversation, something me and my wife been practicing lately. There's psychologists in the room that probably get this. Or when you're in a conversation with people, say, "Tell me what I just said," and people cannot verbatim say it back because they really weren't listening. They'll give you an interpretation of what you just said, but not a verbatim back. And so we've been practicing actually saying back what the person said. If I say I'm tired and hungry, say, what did I just say? Well, you said you're sleepy and want to go eat. That's not what I said. I said I was tired. And that's what we do in these conversations. We don't really hear each other. Yes, yes, and yes.
On the same line, some people, or maybe both participants, have the feeling that the other person is putting words in their mouths.
Yeah.
Which they didn't mean.
Right.
It's a matter of understanding
Right.
of the other, of listening maybe.
Could you repeat? I didn't get it acoustically.
Sometimes one or both participants begin to feel that the other person is putting words in their mouths.
Okay. Manchmal haben auch die Gesprächsteilnehmer den Eindruck, dass das Gegenüber ihnen etwas in den Mund legt, was eigentlich gar nicht so gemeint war, aber es kommt eben dann wieder falsch an, weil man zu viel von dem anderen reinhört, was man eigentlich gar nicht gewesen ist. So, thanks.
Emotions, yeah. We bring a lot into a room, emotions, and then so what actually happens often in different conversations is that people are just, with all these things we just named, people are thrown in a room and say, well, let's talk about racism, or let's talk about anti-Semitism, let's talk about, without really naming the stuff that we just named to navigate those things. Those things are real. Did I miss a hand? Yes.
Yeah, to pick her argument up, I would say like the form of the conversation kind of itself, because conversation is about just speaking with each other, and we are surrounded in a world where everything has to have an aim or something like that, like kind of instrumentally thinking of conversation, like I'll go in the conversation to have a goal in the end.
Yeah.
And then you are starting to speak, not speak openly and have a conversation, like a dialogue. You more or less like try to invert ideas or have an instrumental acting against the person.
Yeah.
It feels like a machine tool.
Yeah.
Who's getting used,
Yeah.
not like a partner in a dialogue.
Yeah. Why are we talking about these things? This is what I hear too in what you're saying. Like, what's the goal of the conversation? You know, is it to have debate? I mean, I actually love a great debate, but all conversations aren't for debate. They for discourse and civil discourse and hearing. So thank you. So given that, you know, we want to structure conversation in a way that's, especially in the classroom, that are meaningful. I want to just quickly, this is one way of thinking about how to structure talking about difficult moments. This is not the only way, but this is a way in which we approach this at Facing History, and it's been a useful framework. So it's not the only framework. But we believe, especially in an education context, that conversations ought to be grounded in intellectual rigor, right? Primary source documents, historical fact, historical understanding, practicing the tools of history, you know, critical thinking, asking good questions, going to really good sources, rigorous, grounded in rigor. But rigor is not enough, right? Intellectual rigor is not enough, because transformative learning doesn't just happen in our heads. We have to engage our hearts. All right, so there at the bottom of this triangle is this idea of emotion engagement. That there needs to be space made for emotion engagement. That's why I started this morning with, why do you do this work? It's not your rigor, it's something else that keeps you motivated, because memory work, justice work, this work is hard. So what keeps you going is that emotional piece that matters to you. So it's the intellectual rigor, the emotional engagement, and this idea of ethical reflection, where students and ourselves get to ask moral questions about difficult moments. So here we don't tell students what to feel, but we make space for students to express what they feel and to be vulnerable and to connect with the learning to their emotions, making space for that, but not telling students what to feel. We don't tell students what to believe. What's the answer to today's moral questions? Teaching for us is not giving students answers, but giving them the space to ask the moral questions. Why do people do what they do? How did that happen in a democracy over a small number of months or a small number of years, that something like the Holocaust could happen? Or in a country like the U.S. that was founded on the principles of all men being created equal, at the same time, we're going to start a system of enslavement, an economic system of enslavement in the context of freedom and democracy. How does that happen? How do people do such things? These are moral dilemma questions that students get to explore. And so it's in those explorations that they find their voice and their civic agency. You heard the students yesterday say that, well, one of the students said, I don't even care about history at first. I just want to make a D in the class. And then I found my why. I found something to care about. She found her emotional engagement. She found that history had ethical dilemmas, and then became interested in history. And I'm sure she's not making D's anymore at Sabbath, right? So she's engaged in a different way. So this is the sort of the hallmark of a different conversation. So we deem these as reflective classrooms. And these are some of the things that happen in reflective classrooms, right? That there's a culture of questioning. A culture of questioning. That learning happens in this culture of questioning. In developing critically consciousness. You know, even for adults, critically consciousness in this sense, in this context, means constantly interrogating not other people but yourself. What are you missing? How are you showing up? What are your blind spots? What things you need to really face in your own thinking? You know, we're so good at, especially those of us who deem we're on the right side of history, on the good side of history, we're so good at pointing to the other. Say, they got it wrong. Those people on that side are so off. But critical consciousness is about where you're off, because we're all off somewhere. We don't never totally arrive, so we got to keep questioning ourselves. How do you connect to students' lived experiences? Because until it matters, it doesn't matter for students, for young people. Until it matters to their community, to their lived experience, to their everyday lives, it really doesn't matter. They may take in the information to pass the test, but it still will not matter until it matters to them. So how do we make space for their lived experience? Leaning into discomfort, not unsafe, but dialogue about difficult things. If you're never uncomfortable, then you're probably not talking about anything. If you're never uncomfortable. Not unsafe, we should be socially and emotionally safe, but if every now and then something doesn't make you go, ouch, you know, we're probably not pushing deep enough and being more vulnerable enough. And then it matters how you leave people. Don't let the bell ring and the students are standing in Auschwitz for the first time, right? Don't let the bell ring, because it matters how you come out of the conversation. So you don't want the bell to ring and the kids are in a camp, or you don't want the bell ring in the U.S. and there's a lynching. I'm pointing to my good friend Carlos because he does wonderful work on massacres and lynching. But where do you take students and ourselves safely out of these conversations too? Safely in, safely out, and we try to end with agency. Students not feeling yoked by history, but actually that they now can do something, that they have voice, right, and that they can be upstanders. So this was really important in the school that I was teaching the Holocaust in. And all this is important because unfortunately, because of systemic structural racism, the students that I was teaching had very little opportunities to do what I'm talking about, any of this. They were not being taught this way. They were being given what I call this sort of low expectation education, the soft bigotry of low expectations, where these students, particular students, because of, again, structural racism around their neighborhoods and ideas about what they could and could not do, they were not afforded the opportunity to learn this way. Stereotypes and really myths and write out lies about what kids could and couldn't do and shouldn't be able to do. So that was important in this community. So let me stop there. Any reflections on any of this, thoughts, ideas? These are the 5 I put. You might think about other elements of a reflective classroom. What are you thinking about on this part? Anybody thoughts, reflections? Additions, anything? So this classroom, I want to take you into, the students were, we were using this primary resource of Facing History, Holocaust and Human Behavior. So you can go a lot of places and learn the facts and dates and what happened in the Holocaust, some wonderful Holocaust education. But there's something about being particular about adding the human behavior part to it, right? The Holocaust and human behavior, not just Holocaust, but Holocaust and human behavior. The choices that people were making in this moment in history. So these students, for the first time, was grappling with this, and this is some of the language that we use to unpack human behavior. You might find this language useful if you don't already use it. Who are the victims? And we started adopting the word targets because nobody made themselves a victim. They were targeted. They became victims. Nobody was born a victim by virtue of being, Jewish or anybody else. We were, as Dr. Plummer mentioned in our group the other day, we weren't slaves, we were enslaved. So the language matters. Nobody was born to be a slave, they were enslaved. So people are targets, and then there's perpetrators. And then bystanders, very pivotal. You know, we focus a lot on perpetrator behavior sometime in history, but what was everybody else doing? What was happening? What were the people who never became Nazis? What were they doing? What were the bystanders? What were they doing? Because they're pivotal. And then there are the resistors. If we don't let students see that there's all along, there are resistors, right? People that are fighting against it in small and big ways. Resistors, hiding somebody, or just doing even any little small act of resistance. All of it matters, yes.
So these are really helpful.
Yeah.
And for students to understand these definitions.
Yeah.
But once they understand them, you have to break them all up.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we walk in and out of these roles
That's
in
good.
different ways. Sometimes people are bystanders, but they also could be a target, or they could be resistors, and so it's not so clear.
That's right. These are not like check-off categories. Thank you, Mark. Anybody in this room could find themselves situationally in any of these boxes, right? And it's fluid. And one day, and in one moment, you could be experiencing this, and the next moment, you can be in a different role. So thank you. Yes, it's a good point. I sort of, just as food for thought, David Gushee says, from a moral point of view, there's really no such thing as a bystander. If one is present, he's taking part. And it's not whether you agree with that or not. You may agree with that or not agree with that, but this is the kind of way in a classroom we can nuance these terms, right? They're not just fixed definitions to throw on the board. These ought to be grappled with. What does it mean to resist in the context of something like genocide? What does that even mean? And what does it mean to be a bystander when your choice to act could be your own life? So is it fair to just call that, to judge that person's actions? As right? So these things become nuanced in the context of the history, is what Mark is pointing out. So I want to, this is where we would need the sound if it worked, yeah. So as Lily is setting that up. So the students have gone through a 6 week semester, 6 weeks unit of the Holocaust at this point. They're at the end. And the question that was posed to these students is what did you gain from this study of the Holocaust? That's what the film, this short clip, they're answering that question. What did it mean to you to study the Holocaust? And I want you to hear what the students had to say. You'll get just for a little setup. So this community in Memphis, primarily all African American community, very historical community. If you're ever in Memphis, it's called the Douglas community. Very historical, just generationally, people have stayed in the community, very proud community. This school had actually been shut down, had been closed, and because of the socioeconomics around the neighborhood, the school board didn't think the neighborhood could sustain the school. Young people were leaving the neighborhood, but the alumni of the school, the graduates of the school, fought till the school was reopened. And when it reopened, it became a Facing History school. And so in this school, they built this school around the ideal of civic participation, which made it a good partner, our school, for us. So you'll see the community around the school in the context in which the students were learning. So as you hear, again, they are answering the question of what did I get out of studying the Holocaust. I think we can put the captions on, even
Yeah.
I think it's
Where? I don't think there is a caption.
it wasn't a thing down there to give us that option. Okay.
I will just.
It's okay.
It was working. I tried it before, I swear. It is connected.
Willie, I think the first part didn't have sound, just didn't have sound, so just.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. So I had a heart attack for no
Nobody
reason.
saying anything.
Oh,
Now he
you-
is.
Now it's
Let's
yours.
go to the,
Okay.
when I,
Actually,
Yeah,
history
we're fine.
class, it just happens to be a history story.
Wait, I will go back
You're
here,
okay, yeah.
and now
Our
you can.
first meeting, I was hooked. It was something different. It's a different way to look at it. It's not actually a history class. It just happens to be a history story.
Well, it was a different kind of history. It wasn't just reading, textbooks and taking quizzes. We actually discussed different issues that have happened in history and talk about the way we feel about it and our different opinions, and also how other people feel about it.
we can see outside that the socioeconomic conditions of the community, but we also see on the positive side, we see the resiliency and that it is a community. Even with all those challenges, there are people that have been here forever and have great pride in the community. I think those kids bring their resiliency to the study of the Holocaust, even where they can see in another narrative what happened to another people in another place. In this case, when they look, for example, through the lens of what happened with Jews in Germany.
Being an African American young lady, sometimes learning our history, we sometimes feel that we have the worst history coming from slavery, from living to urban communities. But studying facing history, you learn that you aren't the only one. And you find similarities with other teens and other people who are your age or even older, and you learn about other people's history and the way that it has shaped them and the world today. So in facing history, just studying other people's histories and other people's cultures, you learn how to respect them differently and how to view others differently.
Most of us think that just because we're in a bad society that we are bad. Most people don't take the time out to think that since we're in this society, we can make good out of it or make a positive out of a negative.
When students walk in a facing history classroom, and this is unique to facing history, because we're intentional about it and value it. When students walk into a facing history classroom, they know that not only is this a space, but there's an expectation to be a critical thinker. Let's talk about what happens when that's not present. In a typical class, absent from that, there is a lack of engagement where students are passively receiving information from the teacher. They are passive consumers of knowledge.
We talk a lot about in this class about choices. You have choices to do certain things, but most kids that are our age choose the wrong path. Why should kids be in gangs when they should be in books or learning? Why should people be in certain groups? Why do people get in certain groups?
They go right to making the important connections to human behavior, to the choices and the decisions that people are making in this critical moment in history, and then connecting it to our lives today. So they are getting it. And it's exciting to see them get it.
To really understand yourself, we really do have to understand that you really do have to face this story, because it's not just his story, it's our story. And until you realize that, you can't move forward.
Yeah, and those students was amazing. That was just a small snippet of their reflections. I have journals from them that I've kept. Pretty amazing. I want to give you an opportunity now, again, to go as we're wrapping up, have some smaller group conversation. As you heard those students, one, what might have been a little surprising about what you heard, or most interesting about what you heard from the students about what they got out of this study? So just a reflection on the student voices and what you heard. And then think about, if you would, the whole session, if you would share with somebody, what have you been grappling with in terms of your own work? And then as we wrap up, I even would like Sabbath to share, because she's doing similar work with her students, to share, like, listening to this session and hearing these students, where are those connections? Because this workshop that we're coming together for is about thinking about the connections, and where were you thinking in this? So after some small group conversation, 2 or 3 people together, just reflecting on the video, then I would love for you to reflect with the group a little bit. Is that okay? All right, thank you.
Hey.
I just need a moment.
I'm sorry. Just share session that sort of, resonates with you, where you taught your kids, you remember what
It depends if we work with technology.
Yeah, that's right. Make it. That's the thing. Yeah, probably not. Yeah, it's probably too much.
So it depends if it comes from a gymnasium or from an Oberschule. And but that's why we talk about. I think that's the difference between us and the history teacher. The history teacher is like putting all these informations into the classroom. But we join them and we ask them, hey, who are you? Who of you knew that his family has a refugee background from Schlesien? And until now, almost 20% of pupils raise their hands because they know that it's not random. So we start with an individual biography. Touch that lady, or touch some of them. So then, if you then start to talk about the Holocaust and the Second World War, you have another yeah. And that's why they don't think they are victims or anything. And they don't say, oh, I don't want to hear anything about it anymore. Because we talk about their hometowns. We talk about places where they walk every day. And maybe that's the difference.
You're in high school, you think it's
It was also the reason why I started to start this research with Sophie. Because Sophie and myself, we have a refugee background in our family. So, yes, so we would not be here, we would not exist if the Second World War didn't happen, then Germany lost its east. Exactly. So,
Hey, if you can excuse me for a minute, because I just thought about something.
It's a personal way to explore history.
Just a second, if I could interrupt your conversation just a second, because I just thought about something important that I needed to mention that I didn't. And I'm sorry for the interruption, but this is so important. This is not instead of African American history. I didn't mention that, but I just want to name that. It wasn't like these students need to study the Holocaust in place of, instead of African American history. This is what literally happened is that this teacher, I was a visiting teacher in the permanent teacher's classroom, so I wasn't their teacher of record. I was working for Facing History, visiting, sort of like a visiting teacher. The next semester, the students actually then stepped back into civil rights history, African American history, and what interestingly happened, because of the frameworks that they learned from learning the Holocaust, the frameworks, their historical distance gave them some safety to be more vulnerable. And then when we went into the conversation next semester around Reconstruction in the U.S. and in U.S. history, the students, even the teacher said that the students were in a different place, like they were more engaged with the American history. So it was something about that historical distance, that identity distance maybe, like this is not so close to me right now, that gave them some agency to then lean more into. So that was sort of interesting to me. I didn't anticipate that happening, but I saw it, and I can't unsee it. They definitely leaned more like, wow, okay, now I can lean even more into my own history, my own narrative. That was a fascinating outcome. So I want to share that, but please go back to your conversation.
Taking them all
Oh, last night. And then they kept up. So, I mean, I was always interested in history. As a youngster, you know, you watch like James Ryan, all these war movies, and there's a fascination about it. And then you realize, oh, my family got this background, and my grandfather was a prisoner of war in the Czech Republic. And we visited, after he had a heart attack, we visited in the 90s after the fall of the wall. The place where he was a prisoner of war. And suddenly I realized, oh, my grandfather can speak Czech. I didn't know that. And then I heard the story that my grandfather never wore shorts because during his time as a prisoner of war, his legs black because of the cold. So it was like a shame for him, so he never just wear pants. And it was, as I'm pretty sure I mentioned it before, Sophie and myself, we asked our question, how can we transform this knowledge? How can we reach out to people, and not only to students, also to interested public? And so we brought everything that existed before, books about during National Socialism together, and just thought it's a puzzle. So I think we will never finish this because something is lost forever and we cannot find it. But I don't think that one reason why I started with this work, it's like a mixture of different things that happen. And then the outcome is one of the reasons why we keep going. We received some prizes, we've been invited to networks, that's pushing. I think that's also important. Not only to start, but to keep going. It's necessary to keep going. Also, yeah. So, yeah, every year at least one student is writing in Facharbeit. And I mean, okay, you have 60 students, but only one every year is writing something, but at least it's one.
Okay. Just take about another minute to wrap up.
Very good. Most of the conversations they did victims of war, they did victims of allies, they did victims of bombs.
How would you, I never thought about it, I really like the idea, but how would you translate it into German? Target.
German is not as exactly as German has also said something, which I think is wonderful. About victims about
It's pretty tough.
Would you use one word or would you use a series of words?
Yeah.
Everybody in German.
Okay. All right, if you just wrap up your conversation.
Most of the time we hear that all my grandparents gave these forced laborers something to eat. Or, so, like,
That's another part. Yeah.
it feels like 80% of Germans were resistance against it. That's totally wrong.
You have to learn them. You have to
Yeah.
can say that German is actually will translate.
Okay, just you can say that now.
Ich wollte nur als kurze Anmerkung an die Deutschsprechenden, wenn ihr, also wenn jetzt gleich auch ein bisschen, um was mitzuteilen, ihr dürft gerne auf Deutsch das sagen und ich übersetze es dann sehr gerne ins Englische. Also es ist nicht so, dass ihr euch nicht beteiligen könnt an der Unterhaltung. Ich bin dafür sehr gerne da. I just told the German speakers that if they want something, if they want to say something, that they're very welcome and they shouldn't feel, shouldn't hold back because I will translate into English.
Yes, thanks. I do want to bring Sabbath to just make some connections from what you've been hearing. You know, what feels similar to your experience with your students, or what might be a little different. But yeah.
Also ich rede jetzt auch mal auf Deutsch. Also ich bin Lehrerin.
Aber ihr müsst jetzt immer ein bisschen Pause machen, weil
Ja, ist klar. Ja. Also ich bin Lehrerin hier in Berlin, in einem Bezirk, also im Moabit, das ist ein Bezirk, wo 90% der Schülerinnen und Schüler einen Migrationshintergrund haben.
She's a teacher in Berlin, you all know that, where 90% of the students have a migration background.
Ich finde interessant, das letzte war auch gerade, was du gesagt hast, dass du die Erfahrung gemacht hast, dass die Schülerinnen und Schüler sich mit dem Holocaust, nachdem sie sich mit dem Holocaust beschäftigt haben, dann auch offener waren, sich oder anders damit umgegangen sind, als es dann um die amerikanische Geschichte ging.
What she found is especially interesting was that in this film we saw that the students, after they learned about the Holocaust, were more open to deal with their own American history.
Bei uns würde ich sagen, es ist genau andersrum. Die meisten Schülerinnen und Schüler der Schule, obwohl sie in Deutschland geboren sind, obwohl ihre Eltern in Deutschland geboren sind, ihre Großeltern als kleine Kinder hierher gekommen sind, also alle die deutsche Staatsangehörigkeit haben, sich eigentlich im Gros nicht als Deutsche fühlen. Und aus diesem Grund Geschichtsunterricht insgesamt, aber insbesondere bei der Auseinandersetzung mit der deutschen, also mit dem Holocaust, sie sich oft fühlen, dass sie ein Thema eigentlich aufgedrängt bekommen.
And for her students, it's the other way around. Even though most of them have been born here, were born in Germany, or even their parents were born in Germany, whenever they learn about German history in school, they feel like this is a part of history that is that they were forced to learn, and that they actually kind of have want to push this away.
Und von daher meine Erfahrung ist, ich habe jetzt seit 2015 eine Arbeitsgemeinschaft Erinnern, wo wir uns eben mit dem Holocaust beschäftigen, aber wo ich immer versuche, also zum Beispiel beginne ich die Arbeit möglichst, wenn es finanziell möglich ist, mit einer Israelreise, wo die hauptsächlich muslimischen Schüler eigentlich sich erstmal auseinandersetzen, was ist jüdisches Leben, was ist Leben in Israel zwischen Muslimen und jüdischen und christlichen Menschen, dass sie sehr stark das Gefühl haben, ich beschäftige mich mit meiner eigenen Geschichte, wo kommt meine Familie her, wo bin ich muslimisch, wo bin ich deutsch, wo bin ich einfach nur ich, also dass sie sich eigentlich erstmal mit ihrer eigenen Identität beschäftigen.
So she started this working group AG Erinnern in 2015, and what she tries to do with her group, because most of them are Muslim, she doesn't start with the history of the Holocaust, but she, if financially possible, she starts with a trip to Israel, so that they, with their identities as being Muslim but also being German, can experience more, their identity of what does it mean to be Muslim in Israel, and they can see this life in Israel where Muslim and Jewish people live together, and then they kind of start with their own identity and also with their own family history, and this is kind of the way in for Zabe to open this.
Der nächste Schritt ist dann eigentlich, sich ganz stark mit Biografien von Menschen, von Verfolgten, aber auch mit Tätern auseinanderzusetzen, um dann eben auch, also ich sage immer, auch wenn das in Deutschland nicht gerne gesehen wird, notwendig ist der Vergleich. Das heißt nicht die Gleichsetzung von was passiert mit Geflüchteten und was geschah mit Juden in der NS-Zeit, aber dass ein Vergleich ist zwischen Leben von Verfolgten und Leben von Geflüchteten, das ist total wichtig für die Schülerinnen und Schüler. Und ich glaube, durch diese Biografien, wo sie dann sehen, aha, da gibt es Parallelen, da ist etwas passiert, was mir irgendwie bekannt vorkommt, und sei es nur den erfahrenen Rassismus, ist der Zugang inzwischen, würde ich sagen, einfacher mit Schülern mit Migrationshintergrund herzustellen als mit Schülerinnen rein deutscher Herkunft.
So the next step for her is to really do this biographical work, and working with biographies of persecuted groups, of discriminated groups. And even though it is difficult to make comparisons between the Holocaust and other persecution stories, it is important to talk about like being a refugee and having discrimination experiences in order for them to relate. And she says that now she actually feels that sometimes it's easier to do this work because you can approach it that way with people who migrated to Germany rather than students who are like ethnic Germans.
Sorry. No, that's fine. Okay.
Also ich muss dann auch wieder Deutsch. Also ich bin Sozialarbeiter.
He's a social worker.
Und ich habe eine Gruppe von jungen Menschen, die aus den unterschiedlichen sozialen Herkünften kommen in dem Projekt.
And in his project there are students coming from various social backgrounds.
Aber eins verbindet sie alle eigentlich aus der Vergangenheit her, ihrer Familien, dass es bei uns in Ostdeutschland keine Juden gab. Also offiziell gab es gar keinen jüdischen Glauben. Wir wussten noch gar nichts. Also die Eltern können nichts erzählen, die Großeltern möchten nichts erzählen.
But they have one thing in common, and that is because he lives in East Germany. They have one thing in common, that in their biographies, Jewish life doesn't exist. Because in Eastern Germany, or in their families, Jewish belief wasn't acknowledged and didn't exist. So their parents couldn't tell them anything, and their grandparents were silent. Yeah.
Dann kommt dazu, dass der größte Teil Schulabbrecher sind und die also auch von der Schule her nichts erfahren aus der Zeit der Shoah.
And the problem is that the students he works with are dropouts So they dropped out of school before they could even learn about this kind of history. So in Germany, just a side note, you start learning about the Holocaust usually when you're like 15, 16, 16, and they often dropped out even before.
Nur kurz ein Beispiel, welche Schwierigkeiten es gibt. Wir bearbeiten jetzt gerade den Antisemitismus nach 1945 in beiden deutschen Staaten. Und da wir ja nun jetzt gerade in Ostdeutschland arbeiten als Projektgruppe, bekommen wir von Menschen aus der DDR-Zeit ganz viel Anfeindung. Wir sollten nicht über den Holocaust in der DDR berichten. Das ist sehr schwierig für die Jugendlichen, das zu erleben.
What the current project is concerned with anti-Semitism after 45, and what they experience right now, and which is really hard for the students to situation to be in, is that they are trying to research anti-Semitism in both, so in East Germany and West Germany, and they get a lot of rejection in East Germany that they shouldn't do this research, and that's a hard situation because, yeah, they don't want to talk about anti-Semitism after 45 in the East, and so they get pushed back with this work, which is hard for the students to experience. Steve, I just translated. You can narrate this conversation.
No, that's fine. I'm just listening. I'm fascinated by what I'm hearing.
Then
We have about 5 more minutes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also ich habe so den Eindruck und die Erfahrung bei der Führung eines Geschichtsvereins in einem kleinen Ort mit 10.000 Einwohnern, dass wir einfach, und das ist eigentlich in unserem Land so gegeben, eine flächige Auseinandersetzung in der Zivilgesellschaft, in Vereinen, e.V., also organisiert, gemeinnützig, anerkannt, und wir haben die verschiedensten Haushalte, Gemeinde, in den einzelnen Verwaltungseinheiten beim Land, um für unsere Aktivitäten auch Geld zu bekommen. Ganz konkret die Anfahrt eines Zeitzeugen oder Übernachtung, Essen, Trinken und so weiter, und auch ein gesellschaftliches Event solchen Zeitzeugen. Und da kommt bei mir eine ganz große Ernüchterung. Die Bürgermeister, habe ich so den Eindruck, sind für mich als Demokrat die mächtigsten in einer Gemeinde. Sie sind gewählt, haben ein Gremium, und das muss man respektieren. Aber viele Bürgermeister verstehen sich so unter Druck durch diese Aktivität. Sie müssen beitragen. Sie kommen, wenn man Glück hat, kommen sie. Meistens haben sie keine Zeit oder entschuldigen sich oder bei der Unterstützung von Publikationen. Sie sagen nicht mehr Nein. Also nach 80 Jahren in unserem Staat ist das Thema angekommen. Die anderen müssen auch still sein, sie schweigen, sie schämen sich.
Kannst du vielleicht einfach versuchen, weil ich habe noch nicht so ganz den Kern verstanden.
Die Bürgermeister müssen mehr diese Themen unterstützen, die Demokratie stärken.
Okay, so what he's saying is that one of the problems in Germany is also that on a local level, the mayors or the local politicians should support this kind of educational work more.
So this is familiar. So so we can connect on that point for sure. Most of the problems we have with educating for justice and equity is around structural structural racism. It's around bad allocation of resources. Not giving students what they need to be successful. Like a class like Facing History in ourselves, if it were not for sort of philanthropists or people giving gifts to Facing History, private donors, Facing History would never be in a school like this. The school district probably wouldn't pay for it. So there's always public will to do the right thing, especially in education. Like if there was public will to end education inequity in the state, it could end. There's no will to do it. In the community that I teach in, we have a public funded, tax funded, $250 million basketball arena. But we don't have enough money for schools. These are decisions that people are making about the value of these students and the value of education. And so that's the reality that we're working through. So we're about out of time. Thanks everybody. What I would love for you to do, because a good discussion would often leave you with more questions and answers. So I want to give you 30 seconds. We're not going to share it out loud, but formulate a question that you want to take away. What's a good question that this is leaving you grappling with, this conversation? What's a good question? What's this leaving you thinking, want to know more about, to think more about, to ask more about? So just take literally 30 seconds and formulate a question in your mind that this whole conversation, even in your small groups, is leaving you thinking about. Just trying to push yourself to think about a question, because that's a takeaway. We don't want to end it here. We want to take something with us. So take away a good question. And now I want to thank Lily for working through all this technology stuff.
And I want to thank Steve for this.
So hang on to that question and follow up with somebody with that question.